we realized that a lot of people talked about animal hoarding, but it didn't seem to be a lot of research in Sweden, and there was almost none. So we wanted that, and we wanted to know how common it is, what is it, and what are people doing about it.
Hi, my name's Kris.
My PhD research focuses on cat-human relations and discourses surrounding free roaming cats.
Hi, my name's Sarah Oxley Heaney, and I'm a PhD student with Exeter University, and I'm looking at some shark-human relationships. Our other PodCrew member was unable to be here today, so she's not joining us. But who is joining us is Therese Lillesköld, and she's an anthropologist and an author living in Sweden. And today, Therese is going to talk to us about animal hoarding. So welcome, Therese, and maybe you could tell us something about your research, which I believe you conducted in last year in 2022.
I did, yes. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. And yes, I do some independent research with a colleague of mine, Karin Holmberg, who is a PhD in sociology. And sometimes we do independent research projects. And one of these were about animal hoarding. So yeah, that's what I'm going to talk about today.
Great.
So I guess the first question is how do you define hoarding in the broader context? So I'm thinking of TV shows that they air. I think they're UK or American based sort of hoarders, and it's usually objects, but you're talking about animals.
Exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of people know that you can hoard things because it's well known, and there's been some documentaries, and you have seen people hoarding things, and it could be anything from like collections, books, to food and garbage, really. And but what is less known is that you can also hoard animals, and this is really less known in most countries, even though it's really prevalent. It's really common. So what we found was that this seems to be really common. Why is there no research here in Sweden about this issue? And we wanted to know more about that.
So how did you go about doing your research then? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, we contacted the county municipal boards here who are responsible for animal protection, and there are 21 in Sweden, and 16 of them answered to our survey, and 2 of them answered that it couldn't really give us an answer. So one of the reasons was that they were actually in a situation where they felt threatened because of a animal hoarding situation. So there was a huge animal hoard, like an animal a situation where there was a sanctuary that turned into an animal hoarding situation, and it became really big in media, and so they felt threatened, so they couldn't participate. But we still got answers from 16, so that's good. And we wanted to know how common this is, because when we educated about the link and things around the link, we realized that a lot of people talked about animal hoarding, but it didn't seem to be a lot of research in Sweden, and there was almost none. So we wanted that, and we wanted to know how common it is, what is it, and what are people doing about it. So yeah.
So how do people get identified as being hoarders in Sweden? I mean, I'm guessing there's a lot of people who are hoarders still who are invisible to society, are they?
Yes, yeah, it's quite recent. In the DSM, the manual that psychiatrists use for diagnosis and like psychiatric diagnosis, it's just in the recent one that animal hoarding is a part of it. but it is a diagnosis today that you could be an animal hoarding, and it's part of the hoarding, obsessive hoarding diagnosis. So you can hoard things, but you can also hoard animals, and that's a diagnosis today. And a lot of people would ask me, like, how many animals can you have to be an animal hoarder? But it's not about the amount of animals. You can have a lot of animals, and you can be just an animal owner and take care of the animals, and it can be fine. But if you have animals that you can't really take care of and you still want more, then that's when you reach the limit of the diagnosis. So you just have this you just need more animals, even though you can't take care of the ones you have. And it's not about the amount of animals, but you want more. And the wanting more can be buying more, it can be taking in homeless animals, but it can also be just having animals who are not castrated and getting more animals, even though you can't take care of the ones you have. So if you have cats or rabbits, for example, it'll quickly escalate and you will have a lot of animals. And that's like when you are an animal hoarder, that you still get more.
So I believe part of the diagnosis as well is that the animals end up being neglected and they suffer.
Yes,
so as you said,
that's part of it. Yeah,
has a lot of animals, but they're not neglected. They have all their welfare needs and their psychological needs are fulfilled. But it's when there's this neglect of the animal that the hoarding aspect or the hoarding name comes into it. And
exactly. It's a combination of not being able to care for the ones you have and still getting more. Even if you can't care for the ones you have, you still get more. That's when it reaches the limit of animal hoarding. So, and
from what I've been reading about hoarding, the animal neglect can be mirrored in self-neglect. So I'm wondering if that's a way that the animal hoarding comes to light, is because somebody identifies that the person hoarding is actually in some kind of difficulty, which is noticed by a member of society, then that's reported, and then they find the animals. Is that how it works?
It's a huge issue, because we identify that from research from other countries, we can see different groups of animal hoarders. And when we asked animal inspectors here, we could quickly identify that they see the same kind of groups, and there are 3 groups in general, and 2 of them especially sometimes have, or a lot of times have, other difficulties. So it'll be people like, one of them is called a savior, and they really believe that they are saving the animals. Like, they really believe that they are taking care, they are the only ones who could actually take care of the animals, but they are often very isolated and they have other difficulties, and they don't see how the animals actually are compared to themselves. So there is a lot of human suffering in this as well. And this is what we also found, that there is such a lot of human suffering. And still, this is seen, at least in Sweden, it's viewed as an animal welfare issue, but it's really not that. It is an animal welfare issue, but there's also a lot of suffering for the humans involved. So they have to cooperate, and they have to you have to help the person really doing this.
So it's like most things in society, everything is entangled and intertwined, really.
Exactly, yeah. And there are different groups. There are 3 different distinct groups of animal hoarders. And one of them is like the savior, that they feel that they can save the animals. They're the only ones who can really take care of the animals, and they have empathy for the animals, but it's blurred. Like they can't really distinguish what is the animal's needs and what is my needs. They are very often have other diagnoses like autism, difficulties, anxiety, things like that, and they haven't got help for that. So So that is one main group, and then you have the other group that is more sociopathic and not feeling for the animals and just collecting the animals because they get a gain for it. So it's complicated because there are different groups in it, really. And today, in many countries, they are just lumped together and treated the same, and this is a problem.
Yeah, I was reading Patronek was talking about, he was actually talking about 5 different categories. I was trying to put it up on the computer at the moment. Overworked caregivers, which seems one that a lot of people would easily get. Then, as you say, the rescue hoarders, which I think comes under the category you were talking about, the failure aspect. Incipient hoarders, exploiter hoarders, and breeder hoarders. One of the I was reading about was that, as you were saying about this, this inability to sit, it's like this absorption of what the hoarder is seeing, is unable to see that the animal is actually suffering. So it's almost like they don't have, they just don't have the ability to see that, so they can't see the suffering. And this extension of them, the animal being an extension of their own way that they see the world. Which is quite interesting.
There are, I mean, if you look at the like Patron's groups are interesting, but they've been sort of narrowed down to 3 groups, and that's probably a simplification, but if you look at the sort of rescuing group, they want to rescue animals, they want to be with animals. There's a lot of connection with trauma, like early childhood trauma, and the sort of trauma that you feel like you can be with animals but not with humans, and a lot of emotional trauma. And this is what is also distinguishing the group from our animal hoarders from the ones who just collect things, that there is a lot of emotional trauma. And a lot of animal hoarders will also collect things, but the main, also the difference is that they also have a lot of emotional trauma, attachment trauma, things like that, and also a lot of other undiscovered, like diagnoses, that things that they psychiatric diagnosis that they would have needed to get help with, and hadn't. So like with the rescue group, there is a lot of emotion. There is a lot of emotions for the animals and attachment to the animals, really, but most of them have a difficulty distinguishing, like, what do I need and what do the animals need, and this might end up with the animals being really, really, really suffering. So
and again, from what I've been reading about it, it was talking, and we can put the references in the following this podcast. But one of the authors was talking about, as you said, about this triggering, traumatic childhood events can trigger a need for self-repair. This is how it was described. And it's actually by, as you say, not being able to have an attachment to caregivers when people were growing up, and then being able to be attached to having some kind of unconditional love from other than human animals, actually develop this attachment disorder, as it's described, whether that's how the medics describe it anyway. And that's really interesting to see how people can be so, I mean, I know we're talking about hoarding at the moment, but how people can get a really much more fulfilling relationship or feel more self-worth through a relationship with an animal than they can with humans within their social group, which is so do hoarders actually tend to withdraw from society quite a lot?
Yes, many of them do. Again, it comes to these distinct groups because there's this overwhelmed caregiver that might might actually have been a person who have bred animals, who have been really a part of society, but then something happens and it sort of escalates into not being able to take care of the animals, and they still breed or they still get more animals. So they tend to slowly be more a part of society. But then if you look at the rescue group, the second group, they are often a part of society in the beginning, or they can be sort of reaching out to animal rescue groups in a way, but they tend to have this feeling that they are apart from society, really, and they can be really socially isolated, like you wouldn't imagine, really, and not having any social contacts with humans at all, but just with animals. So
I think
so a lot of them do. Yeah.
And I think especially with cat hoarding, they're also sort of shunned a bit by society too. If there's a lot of cats around and the neighbors are starting to complain. And I saw a really nice a YouTube clip from Kitten Lady, sort of, and I was really touched by how compassionate she was towards the hoarders, and sort of suggesting ways that you can help them by sort of basically get in contact with them. So the example she gave was like a lady who just wouldn't even answer the door because she was used to people sort of knocking, and she was afraid of animal welfare coming. And I guess like what you talked about, she felt she was the only one that could care for these cats. So she was very resistant to outside help because a lot of the help was attacking. And and she was suggesting sort of leaving cat food at first and just sort of approach sort of, we want to help you help the cats rather than we want to get rid of all your cats. And I can share a link to that. But I think that really highlights, because the immediate reaction is to hate on hoarders, and because you see the harm that they're causing, but when their intention is good, it's hard. It's hard, right? I guess that's the the key thing for research. It's not black and white.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I wrote a short piece, like a fictional piece about hoarding, and published somewhere, and the reaction was really that how can you really feel for these people, because they are creating suffering for the animals, and that is true. And I can yes, there is a lot of suffering, but there is a lot of human suffering as well. This is really an issue where it's connected, and not all, but many of the hoarders actually feel for the animals, but they're not able to care for them.
I guess at some point they just they can't cope anymore, and then that causes some because they're not seeing the suffering, right? They're still thinking they're helping, and maybe they were in the beginning taking in a couple of homeless animals that they could, and that was in control. And
yes,
I guess
absolutely.
at what point are you no longer? It's probably not easy to see, and I couldn't imagine being in that situation. But
no, it is hard, and I mean there are sanctuaries and rescues who have gone into hoarding, and there is not a clear line, but at some point it just goes into the like you can't care for these animals, and you still getting more of them, and there is such a lot of loneliness really in a lot of people, that I feel that I have to take care of these animals, no one else does, and that is a big thing as well.
And that's the dichotomy, isn't it? People are rescuing animals from high kill shelters because they think they're alive.
Yes.
There's a difference between the quality of life, sanctity of life. Where does that, where, I mean, is it better to be alive for 5 years in utter misery, or to not? I'm not sure that's
exactly.
But I can see why people would want to step in where they think society's failed, perhaps.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there are so many layers in this, but still a lot of hoarders are really left to themselves. And what we mainly discovered in this study is that animal protection units are the ones who meet these animal hoarders, and they can only do like acute. They do euthanize a lot of animals, especially cats, because cats is the main hoarded animals in all countries and here as well. But they can't do anything more, and we really want a cooperation, like with social services, psychiatry, and veterinarians, and animal protection, and like everybody has to get together. And this is expensive, but it's just because we didn't look at the expense earlier on. We just ignored it, and it turned out like this. So now it's expensive. And
sorry, what's expensive? The response to,
I mean, today to put all these resources into animal hoarding is expensive, but it's just because we earlier on didn't do it. Like we ignore in here as well as in other countries that people need help. And since it just escalates, so we have all these cases of animal hoarding that we discovered today, and it's just the top of the iceberg. And it's like when it gets so acute that there's so many cats or so many rabbits that animal inspectors just have to get involved. But if we had done something earlier, it would have been less dramatic and less expensive. But today it is.
I guess that's how research really sort of comes into this. So I'm thinking of the example with the link, like, and people fleeing domestic violence situations, and the research is pretty clear now that people don't want to leave their animals with an abusive partner, and the risk is high there. And this is the research has sort of now led to action where, and okay, the action is driven from the human welfare side, but they're starting to see that families, women, children are staying in very dangerous situations simply because shelters don't provide housing for the companion animals. And
So the current response in Sweden then is to literally go in, remove animals, possibly all the animals, and leave the hoarder without support. Is that the current kind of response?
Yes, pretty much, yes. When cases of animal hoarding are discovered, it comes to the animal protection unit. And I mean, they are animal people. They are supposed to care for the animals, but they also, when we talk to them, I mean, they do suffer because they see the human suffering, but they can't do anything about it. So in most cases, you just remove the animals, and there is a ban of getting more animals, and everybody knows that this person is not going to follow these guidelines. There is like 100% rate that they will get more animals unless they kill themselves, which is also high risk. But if they survive, if they keep on living, they will get more animals. And animal protection units, they know this, and they have them on the list, and they will go there in a year, and they will find there are more animals, and they will get animals again. But they don't have any tools to help the person, because the person won't stop hoarding animals. The anxiety is just too great.
Yeah, and that's removing your entire family. Imagine the grief that you go through.
Yes,
Even knowing what's happening to those animal individuals. Yes, that's caused accidental harm to, but you know that cat.
Absolutely, and I mean, I can imagine. For it's easy to say that, okay, these animals were suffering, you had to euthanize them, you had to take them. It's easy for us to say, but if I imagine that this person actually doesn't understand that the animals are suffering that great, and if I just for a moment like imagine that someone would come here and take all my animals and just tell me that they are suffering, I'm going to kill them, all of them today, goodbye. It's a trauma that I couldn't even imagine. So for some of these people, this is really what is happening. They really don't see, even if the animals are suffering, and it could be like cats having their eyes all eaten up by bacteria. It could be, a huge lot of suffering, but they don't see it. They don't see it as suffering. They see it as they are okay. And their experience is that someone is just taking these animals and killing them. So this is when we have to bring in like other treatment, because we know also that this person is suffering, but it's also that this person will either kill him or herself or continue to collect animals, and you will have more animals in a year, and you would just have to take the animals and they have been suffering. So it's just a cycle that is endless and pointless. So
what's your solution then? You want to take an element of social services at the same time?
Yeah.
With the hoarder? Do you leave some animals with the hoarder, or?
Only in rare cases, like when it hasn't gone too far, you can actually leave with a so-called overwhelmed caretaker. That is not a savior. Not, there are 3 groups, but the first group, the overwhelmed caretaker, can actually sometimes keep some animals if someone is checking in and helping them, that the animals, they have to be castrated, they have to, be caretaken. And but in those cases, yes. Otherwise, you actually can't leave any animals, but you have to give a lot of treatment to the animal hoarder so that they can think maybe that after this you can have animals. But there is an anxiety that it's even hard to describe. You have to have medication, you have to have treatment, you have to have a lot of help with anxiety of not getting more animals and just treatment. And there are also all these other diagnoses, like I said, in the group of the so-called helpers. Most of them have other diagnoses that have gone undetected, like they have autism, ADHD, or huge anxiety, depression, or affective emotion, like a lot of things that they need help with first also. So there is a lot of things that you have to bring in for the human.
It seems like the overwhelmed caregiver is where the real intervention can probably be most effective. But then I can also see that perhaps they're reluctant to ask for help because they don't want to be perceived as a hoarder, because they're afraid if they are, then they'll be shunned and the animals will be taken away. Whereas there's sort of a bit of help with the animal caretaking combined with psychiatric help would benefit. But yeah, I can see you mentioned one of the participants, or that they didn't want to respond because they were a shelter that was afraid of being perceived as a hoarding situation, and it's those sort of borderline situation, or potentially, or struggling shelters, right, where the help could be it's
There is some research from the UK on overwhelmed caretakers. They didn't call it that, but when you read the research, you realize that this is what they were looking at, and it's really successful in just getting help from veterinarians in like limiting the amount of animals, replacing some animals, getting some animals sterilized, and help like that, and it was really successful. So they are the group that you can help quite easily. The rescuing group is much more difficult because they have a lot of other diagnoses, and this has not been researched properly, but my suspicion is that a huge lot of them actually have undiscovered autism. And this is a problem everywhere. It's a problem here and in other countries, that you haven't had the help that you get for that. So they are very isolated, and this is really the main issue there. So that's a more tricky group, but when it comes to the overwhelmed rescues, you can actually help them quite, not easily, but quite easily. Yeah, you can. And from the States, there is more research on all kind of groups, but it shows clearly that you have to get all these like everyone has to be involved, like the social services, the psychiatry, the animal protection units, the veterinarians, everyone has to be involved. But then you can actually help animal hoarders. So this is something that we try to educate here in Sweden, because we think that, I mean, yes, it sounds expensive, but what is the expense of just leaving them be? We know that they will just keep on collecting animals. The expense in suffering is huge, but also in money, because we have to go, the animal decks have to go out, they have to euthanize, they have to get it is expensive. If you just talk about money, which I don't like, but if you do that, yes. So just, you know, try to cooperate in all kind of ways would be it would less suffering, but also the money in the long run, I think.
So did in your lit review, did you see hoarding across all continents, or is it a particular part of the world that hoarding is?
Yeah, it actually seems to be a global issue. There hasn't been research everywhere. It's a lot from the States and Europe, obviously, but there's also from South America, there is from Japan and other Asian places. So it seems to be global, which is something that we found a bit amazing, that, you know, it's in different contexts and in cultures, it seems to be this global phenomenon. Like you have these groups everywhere. It seems to be like a human, just the way humans work everywhere. And there is not research from all countries or all continents, but there is enough so that I can say that it seems to be a global issue. And no matter the like cultural context, it seems to be the same or like, at least.
And what about in terms of what type of animals? Are there specific species that are more prone to be hoarded?
In all research that has done has shown that cats are the most, really the most collected animal in every study, and also in ours in Sweden, it's cats. So yeah, cats, and then after that, like small animals, rodents and dogs, but cats is really the main collected animal everywhere, it seems. So yeah,
Is with the highest number of street living cats, or is that even in countries where cats are well maintained by society?
I mean, all research on animal hoarding shows the same, that the cats is the main hoarded animal. So, but there is not research from everywhere, but still cats is the most, it's everywhere in all studies, it's cats. So I mean, you can have there are lots of things, probably reasons for this, but I mean, in Sweden we have no street dogs, we have no homeless dogs living on the streets, but we have like 150,000 homeless cats, and that says something in a small country. So so yeah, cats really, I think they are easy to get and easy to breed, but there are probably 100 other reasons, but because it's just everywhere. Cats is the main animal. So.
And I guess cats are relatively easy to look after compared to different species. Well, did you say that there were like some hoarders that hoarded wild?
Yes, yeah, we have here as everywhere. There are hoarders who actually collect wild animals, and it could be birds, especially. I think in some countries it probably is not birds. They could be. We have like exotic reptiles here, but they are imported, so that's different, and they often fall into the third category of like the exploiters. But here we have like a very famous case of a woman collecting swans, and she collected, I think, 70 swans or something to an apartment in Stockholm. Swans, yeah. She just got to the lake, and she just got them because she felt that they were just not okay. outside. So she wanted to bring them to her apartment. And the most amazing thing is, how could this tiny little woman, she was an old tiny woman, and she actually brought all these huge birds to her apartment and nobody saw it. But finally it was discovered that she had a huge lot of swords in her apartment. So that is one really famous case in Sweden of wild animals. Yeah. And they were, yeah, she just kept them there because they were better off in her apartment, she felt.
Interesting. So
yes, and that's a typical thing for animal hoarder, that some of them go out to collect outdoor cats who are actually just fine, well-living cats, and they just collect them and bring them back to their home and keep them inside because they are better off there. So this is the sort of emotion driving it for some hoarders, that they're better off with me here, no matter what.
Really interesting. So what happened to the swans? Were they rehabilitated?
I think those she had were actually too unwell. I'm not sure about the details, but I think they were euthanized, because I think they had been there for a while and they hadn't, so I think they were euthanized, unfortunately, but yeah.
So is there a percentage of animals that are that do survive these incidents, or most so unwell there?
Actually, dogs here, if I talk about Sweden, dogs almost always survive, because they are prioritized really in dog shelters. Cats are often euthanized, and this is it's about the status, but it is also because people, when there is a huge, like, these are dogs, like when we have cases of like 80 sled dogs or 140 small dogs here, and it comes to media, and people really want these dogs, and some of them really say that we want a dog who has suffered the most. Like there is a huge longing for these dogs. When you talk about cats, there is nothing similar. You wouldn't say like we have 140 really shy cats here, and people would stand in line. So nobody wants these cats. So cats are often euthanized, but dogs are saved. Most of them, actually. That's what it looks like. So
that's really interesting. But you think that might be correlated to Sweden having an overpopulation of homeless cats, but not homeless dogs? So
I think so. Yeah, I think there are many things, but yes, I think that's part of it. Yeah, and that the idea of getting a dog that has been suffering is for a lot of people appealing, obviously, because people stand in line for them. So it's more a problem for the dog shelter to sort of people who would get a dog, but the cat shelters don't have this problem because nobody stands in line. So
it's interesting when you talk about cats being the most hoarded animal, and in my own research there's a couple of like kind of disturbing comments about people like saying they got their cat's an indoor cat, it belonged to the neighbors, and they rescued the cat, and basically a lot of these comments, they were talking about a cat that they rescued, and you're like, are you sure that wasn't like a neighborhood cat that roams and you just took that cat in? And I guess it's sort of maybe the beginning of that hoarding mentality that cats shouldn't be out wandering the streets, so you're helping them. If you can't care for them, it's hoarding, right? It's
yes,
it's interesting.
And I think the beginning of hoarding is also where we have to, there are like two parts. There's one part where we have to actually look at, okay, we have to look at trauma earlier, we have to help people earlier, but there is also the part where people are in the beginning of hoarding situations, where we have to see what this is and help them before it escalates. So that kind of mentality that they're always better with me, they're always better here, it's sort of a sign.
It's interesting as well, because I don't know if there's any consideration of protection of the actual animals, because in the first instance I wanted to ask you about on the survivor dogs. I was wondering if there's any follow-up research to see how they actually coped with that situation. But before we go to that, I was just thinking, for example, in Portugal, every animal, every companion animal, dog, cat, should be microchipped. And if you find an animal on the street, you have to go to the vet. You have to have the microchip checked. If it's microchipped, so many days that you can contact the owner, or the vet contacts the owner actually. And so it kind of prevents, as you say, Kris, this removing the animal from the street and taking it in. I'm wondering as well if there's any kind of protection in those terms for the animals to not be kidnapped, if you like.
Yeah, well, here recently, just 3rd of January this year, finally the law on cats was going through that they have to be microchipped and registered. So it's really, really recent, but yeah, we have it now. Yes.
Is that colony cats as well?
It's own cats, and we have a problem with colony cats, and that there are some trap neuter return like projects in Sweden, but they're also quite looked down upon. So this is something I am a bit curious to research actually, because they are looked down upon, and because it's not really fulfilling the animal welfare laws that we have. And this is where we kind of go into, biopolitics, that an animal is better dead than not fulfilling the animal welfare laws that we have here. So
these are very vulnerable, these colony cats, then, because they can be taken, they're invisibilized by society. And
yes, they're not owned. Right, they are sort of feral, not owned. Is this okay? It's not really clear. If you look at the law, what is an unknown animal? What is it? And what kind of law is protecting this animal? But a lot of saying is that if you trap, neuter, and release a cat, it's just not protected by the law enough. Yeah. So, and because it's not owned, and who owns it, and then to put it very simply, it's better off dead. So this is a sort of biopolitical issue.
Yeah, I was just and it's sort of, I guess it's kind of also related to the struggling and maybe even the hoarder mentality. And I was trying to look up the paper. I can't remember the author, but there's research done in Tel Aviv. It was a couple of years old, the research, but they looked at, and maybe you're familiar with this paper, but they looked at colony caregivers, or people that were feeding the cats, and they were spending a lot of their own resources and time and energy into feeding the cats. But the welfare of the cats was decreasing because they were receiving food, but there was no provision. Trap, neuter, release was I don't know if there wasn't enough affordable veterinary facilities to do this, and it was basically the feeding was increasing or decreasing the welfare of the cats, but the caregivers were invested in helping these cats, but all they could do was provide food. And and it kind of contrasts to the situation in, I think it's Rome. The colony management there works pretty well. Sorry, I'm going off topic here now, but I wonder sort of what you sort of thought about that kind of connection between.
I mean, that very much links to my research for Saudi cats, because people there's such a lack of resources in Saudi, and especially affordable resources. There's so many barriers to animals, to TNVRM, as we call it, with the vaccination and the management at the end in TNVR, is that people, they often, there's a lot of expats in Saudi, and I call them expats because they have got an intention to return to their original country. So there's a lot of expats who go, they see the state of the cats and they want to assist, but a lot of people don't have the financial income to be able to put in place a TM a trap to release program. So they feed, like you say, they feed, which then makes them healthy enough to have a litter of kittens, which then it spirals out of control. And but until there's actually enough resources to do TNVRM on a large basis, or to offer these feeders assistance, there is this disconnect between trying to actually what do you do? Either ignore them and see this and become oblivious to their suffering, or do you try and assist, but you can only assist in a certain way and you're actually making the situation worse. So it's I mean, it's not hoarding, but it's still got this element of trying to assist without, as you say, seeing the extra suffering or not knowing how to get out of it. So survivor dogs, is there any follow-up research on these survivor dogs then that you know of?
Yes, there is, and I can share it. It's not from here, and the interesting thing is really that there is follow-up research on dogs, even though cats are the most prevalent like species everywhere. There's no follow-up research on cats, but we have found a few on dogs, and I can share it. And it says, just to put it very simply, that they have some attachment issues. Some studies show hyper-attachment, some show difficulties in attachment. They have less aggression, but they also have less like learning abilities. It's probably because the brain, I mean, the brain is plastic, and if you don't have a lot of input when you're young, you might end up being it's more difficult to learn things when you're older. But and some studies show that they have nightmares, things connected to like PTSD. But yes, I'm happy to share.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
Yes, absolutely.
And are you intending to do any research on survivor cats or dogs from hoarding situations?
Not right now, but I am interested in looking at the whole aspect of like feral, what we call feral cats, and why we look at them that way, and what to do. And I think actually hoarded cats comes into that. There is a Swedish researcher called Tora Holmberg who calls them homeless cats with the home, and that's really quite. It's quite true that they live with their home, but they're considered homeless, like, because they are not socialized in a so-called proper way. So,
and
so I think, yeah.
And as you probably read our paper, the word feral is very loaded and comes with a lot of
yes, yeah, yes, exactly.
That we struggle with, and yeah, that's interesting. That's
yeah. So that's one. But then currently we are just trying to educate as much as we can about this issue, that more people has to be involved in this, and you have to see the whole picture. You have to see the human and animals. No matter if you care about the animals or the human, it doesn't matter, because you have to look at both if you want to get somewhere. It's really that simple. You have to take care of both.
And is there some willingness for this to happen in Sweden, this connection of services?
Slowly, yes. We are invited to some counties, and so we like taking one part at a time of Sweden. So it's slow, but something at least it's happening, and I hope it'll be faster. So yeah.
It almost seems like there should be some education with the social workers regarding the companion animal bond, sort of maybe sort of like a module in the training, and then for these cases that you really need a social worker who understands the human animal bond, right? Because some people just don't get it, and they're like, well, just get rid of the animals and you'll be fine. And yeah,
absolutely,
yeah. And also the economists, because obviously people who are making out these budgets probably don't connect the cost of animal hoarding over here.
No.
Social services here.
Yes.
You do well, if we do put the connection, as you say, we're actually reducing the cost, numbers and all of that.
Yeah, that's always the problem. You look at cost now and you look at later on, but this is an issue of that it decreases the cost later on. But and that's always the difficulty, and it's sad, but that's the way it looks. Yeah.
I guess it's sort of a good closing question or final question. But, sort of talking about this and reading about your research, I'm wondering how you personally or your colleagues deal with compassion fatigue, especially hands-on and sort of seeing people suffering, seeing the animals suffering. It's got to be tough, right? How do you balance that up yourself?
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good question. It's always there. I think for me, I have chosen to, like, I do research, I do educate, but I don't work hands-on with people. I admire those who do that. I really do. I meet a lot of people who work in cat shelters, dog shelters, animal protection. I mean, they meet people and animals right on. And this is, I think for me personally, I've just realized that this is something I cannot do because it just wouldn't work for me. What I can do is to put things together and educate about it and write about it and help those who do this work. But hands-on work it's not something I can do.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I'm the same too.
But I think we all need it. I don't think it's really unfortunate. I think we are all needed as part of the picture, but you know, we just have different parts to fill. That's what I try to tell myself, I guess. Yeah.
But it's super interesting reading about your research, and I'd love to hear more about what happens. And I think research on the survivor animals would be absolutely fascinating. And how people respond, as you say, differently to different species, and whether that happens across different parts of the globe. You know, as you said, cats in Sweden are not empathized with. As dogs. Fascinating.
Okay, thanks, Teresa. Gerd, it's been great chatting, and we'll share some of those resources and references in the link below. I'm really bad at closing.
And we hope to see you next time.
Yeah, so we hope to see you next time. Bye.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Bye.